Most people walked past without noticing anything unusual. It was a quiet afternoon on a peaceful suburban street. The sun was shining. The neighborhood looked safe, normal, ordinary. But then he saw them. Two little girls standing alone on the sidewalk. One of them barely 3 years old, crying uncontrollably. The older sister trying to be strong, trying to protect someone she shouldn't have had to protect. And in the distance, a woman in a red dress walking away, not running, not looking back, just walking. No one else stopped. No one else questioned it. But one officer did. What he realized in that moment would change everything. Stay with me, because what happened next is something no one on that street was prepared for. Before we begin, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Now, let's get into the story. Most people walked past without noticing anything unusual. It was a quiet afternoon on a peaceful suburban street, the kind of street where children ride bikes after school, and neighbors wave from their driveways, and everything looks, from the outside, exactly the way it's supposed to look. The sun was out. The air was still. Nothing seemed wrong. Officer Daniel Harper was driving his usual route. Windows down, one hand on the wheel, the radio low, when something made him slow the car. He wasn't sure what it was at first. A feeling more than a sight. The particular alertness that comes after years of learning to read the small things that don't quite fit the picture. Then he saw them. Two little girls standing alone on the sidewalk. The younger one, barely 3 years old, was crying. Not the loud, frustrated crying of a child who dropped an ice cream cone. This was something quieter and more exhausting than that. The kind of crying that had been going on for a while. Her whole small face was red, her hands reaching for something, or someone that wasn't there. The older girl was standing beside her, 8 years old maybe, small for her age. She had her arm around her little sister's shoulders and was speaking to her in a low, steady voice. The kind of voice that is trying very hard to sound calm because someone smaller needs it to be. She wasn't crying. She was holding everything together. Harper pulled the car to the curb. He looked up the street, then down, and that's when he saw her. A woman in a red dress maybe half a block away, walking slowly in the opposite direction. Not running, not looking around, just walking. One steady step after another, getting smaller with every second. Harper watched for a moment. Other people had seen the girls, he could tell. A man walking a dog had glanced over, then looked away. A woman unloading groceries from her car had paused, watched for a second, then gone back to her bags. A teenager on the corner had looked up from her phone, taken in the scene and looked back down. Everyone had a reason not to stop, but none of them were reasons Harper could accept. He turned off the engine. He got out of the car slowly, the way you move when you don't want to startle something fragile. He left the door open. He didn't touch his radio. He just walked, unhurried, steady, toward the two girls on the sidewalk. The older one saw him coming. She didn't run. She didn't call out. She simply turned her body slightly so that she was standing between her little sister and the approaching uniform, and she watched him approach with the careful, measuring eyes of someone who had learned not to trust too quickly. Harper stopped a few feet away. He crouched down to their level. "Hey," he said quietly. "My name is Daniel. I'm going to stay right here, okay? Nobody's going anywhere." The little one looked at him through her tears. Her crying slowed slightly. Not because she felt safe yet, but because something new had entered the situation, and her body was trying to decide what to make of it. The older girl studied him. She was still standing in front of her sister, still holding the world together with both arms. And Harper understood in that moment, with a certainty that settled into him before he had any of the facts, that whatever was happening on this quiet suburban sidewalk on this ordinary afternoon was not what it looked like, not from the outside. Not from a passing car, not to anyone who hadn't stopped. The woman in the red dress was a block away now, still walking, one hand brushing the hedge along someone's front yard as she passed. She stopped once, turned her head slightly, and then kept walking. Harper stayed right where he was, because the real story, the one that was going to matter, wasn't walking away. It was standing right in front of him. Harper didn't move any closer. He stayed crouched at their level, elbows on his knees, making himself as small and unthreatening as a man in a uniform could reasonably make himself on a sidewalk in the middle of the afternoon. The little one, Claire, had stopped crying at full volume. She was down to the quieter, hitching kind of breathing that comes after a long cry, when the body is tired but the feelings haven't quite settled yet. She was still pressed against her sister's side, one fist curled into the older girl's sleeve. The older girl hadn't moved. She was watching Harper the way a person watches something they haven't decided about yet. Not with fear exactly. Something more precise than fear. Assessment. The careful, patient attention of someone who had learned that how a situation started didn't always predict how it ended, and that it was worth taking a moment to read things correctly before responding. Harper respected that. He'd seen it before, that particular steadiness in a child's eyes. It didn't come from nowhere. It was earned. "What's your name?" he asked. A pause. Then, "Maggie." "And your sister?" "Claire." She said it without looking away from him. "She's 2.5. She gets scared easily." "That's okay," Harper said. "Being scared is okay." Maggie didn't respond to that. She seemed to file it somewhere, neither agreeing nor disagreeing, just receiving the information and moving on. "Where do you live, Maggie?" She tilted her head slightly toward the end of the block. "Down there. The house with the blue mailbox. Is there anyone home right now?" "No." "Okay." Harper kept his voice level. "Can you tell me about your mom? The woman in the red dress, and that was her?" Something moved across Maggie's face. Not quite defensiveness. More like the expression of someone preparing to explain something complicated to someone who might not understand it. "She goes out sometimes," Maggie said carefully. "To get some air, she always comes back. Has she gone out like this before?" "Sometimes." A pause. "But usually not this long." Harper nodded slowly. He looked at Claire, who was now watching him from behind Maggie's arm with wide, dark eyes that had gone quiet, in the way that very young children go quiet, when they are paying extremely close attention to the adults around them, trying to read the room the way they've learned to do. "Are you two okay?" he asked. "Are you hurt at all?" "No," Maggie said, immediately and with a certainty that told him this was the right answer and she knew it. "Are you hungry?" A shorter pause this time. "A little." Harper stood slowly. "I'm going to stay right here with you until we figure things out together. Is that all right?" Maggie looked at him for a long moment. Then she gave one small, deliberate nod. It was the nod of someone making a considered decision, not a reflexive one. The nod of someone who was extending something carefully and expected it to be handled with care. Harper called for a colleague to come stay with the girls while he searched the nearby area. While they waited, he crouched back down and talked to them about small things. The color of their front door, whether Claire had a favorite animal, what grade Maggie was in at school. 3rd grade. Claire liked elephants. The door was green, not blue. The mailbox was blue. And then, during a pause in the conversation, Harper noticed something. Maggie's right hand kept returning to her coat pocket. Not reaching inside, just touching the outside of it. The way you touch something you want to make sure is still there. A habit so automatic she didn't seem aware she was doing it. Harper didn't mention it, but he noticed. He asked gently if she was feeling okay. She looked at him steadily. "I don't have time to be scared," she said. 8 years old. The words landed quietly and stayed there, the way certain things do. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a weight that Harper knew he was going to be carrying for the rest of the day, maybe longer. The colleague Harper had called was Officer Reyes. Calm, patient, good with children in the specific way that can't be taught, only found. She arrived within 10 minutes and sat down on the low wall near the sidewalk with the easy manner of someone who had nowhere else to be, which was exactly what the situation needed. Claire, after a careful evaluation period of approximately 90 seconds, decided that Reyes was acceptable and allowed herself to be lifted onto the wall beside her. Reyes produced a small pack of animal crackers from her jacket pocket. Harper made a mental note to ask about that later, and the two of them began the serious business of sorting them by species. Maggie watched this from a slight distance, still present, still alert, her hand still returning to her coat pocket at regular intervals. Harper told her he'd be nearby and walk the block. He needed to understand what this street had seen. The woman with the groceries was still at her car. She'd made several trips and was now standing at her trunk, with the kind of expression that said she'd been thinking about whether to say something for the past 15 minutes. Harper made it easy for her. "You saw the girls earlier?" he said. She exhaled slightly. Relief, he thought. at being asked rather than having to volunteer. I did. I noticed them when I pulled in. The little one was already crying. She set a bag down. I watched for a minute. I thought maybe their mom had just stepped inside and would be right back. Did you see the woman in the red dress? Yes. A pause. I saw her walking away. I thought. She stopped. I don't know what I thought. I told myself someone else would handle it. She looked at him directly when she said it, not making excuses, just stating it plainly. The honesty of someone who had been sitting with something uncomfortable. I should have called. Harper thanked her and moved on. The man with the dog was 2 houses down, pretending to check his phone on the front step in the way people do when they want to seem occupied, but are actually waiting to see what happens. He'd seen the girls for at least 5 minutes before Harper arrived. He'd thought about crossing the street. He'd decided the mother was probably just at a neighbor's house. He told himself it wasn't his place. I thought someone else would handle it, he said. He said it almost word for word. The same phrase. The same slightly lowered eyes. Harper heard it a 3rd time from the teenager at the corner, a girl of about 16 who'd been waiting for a ride when she noticed the girls. She'd taken out her phone, had actually started to dial and then stopped, put the phone away, told herself she was probably overreacting. I didn't want to make a big deal out of nothing, she said. Then quietly, was it nothing? No, Harper said. But you didn't know that. None of you did. He meant it. He wasn't there to make the street feel guilty. Guilt wasn't useful here. But understanding was. The understanding that silence, when it comes from everyone at once, can leave a very small child standing on a sidewalk for a very long time. He was walking back toward Reyes and the girls when the teenager called after him. She stopped, the girl said. The woman in the red dress, about a block up. She stopped and looked back. A pause. She stood there for a minute, like she was waiting for something. The teenager hesitated, or deciding something. Harper stopped walking. He turned that over carefully, not running, not hiding, stopping, looking back, standing still long enough for a teenager on a corner to notice and remember. That wasn't the behavior of someone who didn't care. That was the behavior of someone in the middle of something Harper didn't yet fully understand. He looked up the street, empty now, the afternoon light going golden and long across the pavement. Then he looked back at Maggie, sitting on the low wall beside Reyes with her hand resting on her coat pocket, waiting, the way she seemed to do everything, with patience that cost her something and didn't show it. He walked back to his car, got in, and drove slowly in the direction the woman in the red dress had been heading. He didn't know what he was going to find. But he knew, with the certainty of 19 years on the job, that what had happened on this street today was not finished. Not even close. The park was 3 blocks from where the girls had been standing. Harper almost missed it. A small municipal space tucked between 2 residential streets. Easy to overlook if you weren't looking for it. A low iron fence along the front. A path of cracked concrete leading to a cluster of benches around a fountain that ran quietly in the center. Water moving in a slow, steady circle. The kind of place that existed in the middle of neighborhoods for decades without most people ever really stopping there. A place you passed. Not a place you went, but someone was there. Harper pulled the car to the curb and cut the engine. She was sitting on the bench closest to the fountain, the one with the best view of the water and the least visibility from the street. She was wearing the red dress. Her hands were in her lap, fingers loosely folded. She was looking at the fountain with the particular stillness of someone who had stopped moving and was not yet ready to start again. She didn't look dangerous. She didn't look cold or calculating or indifferent. She looked like a person who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had, for just a few minutes, set it down. Harper sat in the car for a moment. He had been doing this job for 19 years. He had learned, slowly, imperfectly, through mistakes he still thought about, that the first few seconds of an approach set the tone for everything that followed. Come in wrong and a door closed that might not open again. He got out of the car quietly. He walked through the gate and along the concrete path without hurrying. He didn't call out. He didn't announce himself. He just walked toward the bench at the pace of someone who happened to be going that direction. When he was close enough, he sat down on the far end of the same bench. Not next to her, not across from her, just present, available, in the way of someone who had time. Melissa didn't startle. She turned her head slightly and looked at him, at the uniform, at his face, and something in her expression said that she had known, somewhere underneath everything, that someone would come. That part of her had been waiting for it. She looked back at the fountain. Several seconds passed. A bird landed on the edge of the fountain basin, considered its options, and flew away. Then Melissa said, quietly, without preamble, in the voice of someone stating a simple fact, "I just needed 10 minutes where no one needed me." Harper didn't respond right away. He sat with those words the way you sit with something that has just shifted the ground under you slightly. Not dramatically, not with noise, just a quiet and permanent rearrangement of what you thought you were dealing with. He had come here expecting. He wasn't entirely sure what he'd been expecting. Something that would fit the shape of the incident report in his head. Something that would make the next steps clear and procedural. This didn't fit that shape. I just needed 10 minutes where no one needed me. That wasn't the sentence of someone who didn't love her children. That was the sentence of someone who had been running on empty for so long that the tank hadn't just run dry. It had started pulling from reserves that weren't there anymore. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. Melissa looked at the water. "I don't know exactly." A pause. "Too long, I know that. Your girls are safe," Harper said. "A colleague is with them." He watched her absorb that. Her hands tightened slightly in her lap. Not with relief so much as with the particular response of a mother hearing that her children are okay, which is a thing that hits the body before it hits the mind. "Claire was crying," Melissa said. It wasn't a question. "She's calmer now." Melissa closed her eyes briefly. "I heard her," she said. "When I was walking, I could still hear her." A pause. "I kept walking anyway." She said it without self-defense, without asking for understanding, just factually the way Maggie delivered hard truths. Plainly because dressing them up didn't make them less true. "That must have been a very hard thing," Harper said. Melissa looked at him, and in her eyes, tired, clear, carrying more than one afternoon's worth of weight, Harper saw something he recognized. Not from any case file, from a kitchen 30 years ago, from a woman who had raised 3 children without asking anyone for help and had gone quietly without things so that they didn't have to. He saw the cost of holding everything together alone. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She nodded. "How long have you been managing everything by yourself?" Melissa looked back at the fountain. The water kept moving in its slow, even circle. "Long enough," she said, "that I forgot what it felt like not to." Harper didn't reach for his notepad. He didn't shift into the formal register that 19 years of procedure had built into his muscle memory. The slight change in posture, the pen coming out, the questions becoming more structured. He stayed exactly as he was, on the far end of the bench, in the late afternoon light, with the fountain moving quietly between them and the rest of the world at a slight remove. Because he understood, without having to reason it through, that the moment this became an interrogation, Melissa would stop talking, not out of guilt, out of exhaustion. She had nothing left to perform for anyone, so he just listened. She talked the way people talk when they haven't talked in a long time, slowly at first, with pauses that had weight in them, and then more steadily as the words found their own momentum. She had been a certified nursing assistant for 11 years. She'd worked at Maplewood Care Facility on the east side, the one with the garden courtyard, and the Thursday afternoon music program that the residents looked forward to all week. She knew her residents by name, by habit, by the particular way each one took their morning medication. She had been, by every measure that mattered in that work, very good at it. The arthritis had started in her hands. She described it the way you describe weather, something that arrived and changed conditions. First, the stiffness in the mornings, manageable if she gave herself extra time. Then the swelling in the knuckles that made the physical parts of the job slower and more careful. Then the pain that started arriving earlier in the shift and staying later. She had tried to manage it on her own for months before seeing a doctor, because managing things on her own was what she knew how to do. Because asking for accommodation at work felt like admitting something she wasn't ready to admit. By the time she saw a doctor, the diagnosis was clear. The treatment options were real but required consistent medical care and medication that her insurance, already stretched, covered only partially. She cut back on other things to cover the costs. Then more things. Then the things that had seemed non-negotiable started to become negotiable because there was nothing left to cut. She lost her job in the spring. Not dramatically. Her supervisor had been kind about it, genuinely sorry, But the facility's demands were what they were, and Melissa could no longer meet them consistently. The insurance ended with the job. She applied for county assistance, filled out the forms carefully the way she did everything, making sure each field was complete, submitted the documentation, received a confirmation number, and then waited, and waited, and waited. I called twice, she said. The first time they told me the application was in review. The second time I was on hold for 40 minutes and then the call dropped. She looked at her hands in her lap. I told myself I'd call again. I kept meaning to. Harper was very still. He thought about a confirmation number sitting in a system somewhere, about a woman calling twice and reaching no one who could help, about the particular cruelty of a process that was designed to assist people but required those same people, already depleted, already stretched, to keep pushing, keep following up, keep advocating for themselves at the exact moment when they had the least capacity to do so. "Nobody ever called you back?" he asked. "No," she said. One word, flat and final, and carrying the weight of 7 months. Harper thought about his mother again, about the pride that had kept her from asking, and the system that had never quite reached far enough to find her. Different circumstances, same silence in the space where help should have been. "The girl's father," he said carefully. "Is he?" "He's not in the picture," Melissa said. No bitterness in it, just fact. "He's been gone for 2 years. It was gradual, and then one day it was complete." Harper nodded. "Any family nearby, anyone you could have called?" Melissa almost smiled. "Not quite. My mother passed 4 years ago. My sister lives in Oregon. We talk sometimes." A pause. I didn't want to tell her how bad it had gotten. She has her own things. Pride, Harper thought. The same pride his mother had carried. The pride that says, "I will not be a burden. I will not ask. I will figure it out." It was a kind of strength. He had always known that. He was understanding now, more completely than he ever had, that it was also a kind of loneliness. "Melissa," he said, "I want to help you, not in the way that makes things harder, in a way that actually helps, but I need to understand the full picture first." He paused. "Is there anything else I should know?" She looked at the fountain for a long moment. Then she said something he hadn't expected. "I tried to get help," she said quietly. "I did everything right. I filled out the forms. I made the calls, I waited." She looked at him. "I just ran out of road before anyone answered." The fountain kept moving. The afternoon light was going amber and long across the park, and Harper sat with that, with the image of a woman doing everything right and still arriving at a bench in a park on a Tuesday afternoon, alone, with her children 3 blocks away and nothing left. He stood up slowly. "Come with me," he said gently. "Let's go see your girls." Melissa looked at him for a moment. Then she stood. They walked back together. Not quickly. Not with the urgency of an arrest or a crisis managed. Just 2 people walking through a quiet neighborhood in the late afternoon. The fountain fading behind them. The residential street coming back into view ahead. Melissa didn't speak much on the walk. Harper didn't fill the silence. He had learned over 19 years that silence shared with someone was different from silence imposed on them, and that the difference mattered. When they turned the corner onto the block, Maggie saw them from the low wall where she was still sitting with Reyes. She saw her mother first. She didn't run, she didn't call out. She just went very still. The stillness of someone who has been holding tension in their body for so long that the release of it doesn't come with noise. It comes with a kind of settling, like a breath let out slowly after being held. Then Claire looked up from the animal crackers. She saw her mother and immediately, without any of Maggie's careful restraint, slid off the wall and ran. Melissa crouched down and caught her. She held Claire against her chest and closed her eyes, and Harper looked away to give them that moment, that small, private closing of a distance that had been too long. When he looked back, Maggie was standing a few feet from her mother watching, not moving forward yet, just watching, with those careful, assessing eyes, making sure. Melissa looked at her over Claire's shoulder. "I'm sorry, Maggie," she said quietly. Maggie held her gaze for a long moment. Then she walked forward and let her mother put one arm around her. It wasn't a dramatic reunion. It was quiet and complicated and real, the way things are when the feelings involved are bigger than any single gesture can contain. But it was something. It was a beginning. Harper gave them a few minutes. Then he drove back to the station. The office was the same as he'd left it. The hum of the building, the keyboards, the coffee machine in the break room that never quite worked properly. Briggs was at his desk with a sandwich and a case file, the way Briggs always was at this hour. Harper sat at his desk and opened the folder. The standard incident report form was right there. Clean, formatted, waiting. He had filled out hundreds of them. The process was automatic. Date, location, names, nature of incident, recommended action. 30 minutes of work, then the machinery of the county system would begin to move. He picked up his pen. He looked at the form. He thought about Melissa walking back from the park, about Claire running across the sidewalk, about Maggie standing still and watching first, making sure when before she let herself move. He thought about what the standard process set in motion could look like for this family. Not because the system was cruel. It wasn't. The people inside it were, by and large, trying. But it was heavy and it was slow and it operated on categories that didn't always fit the shape of real lives. And in cases involving a single parent with limited resources and a documented gap in care, the outcomes weren't always predictable. He set the pen down. Briggs appeared at the edge of his desk with the easy intrusion of someone who had worked in the same building for 20 years. "That the sidewalk thing?" Briggs said, nodding at the folder. "Yes." "Open and shut." Briggs picked up his sandwich. "File it, Harper. That's what the form is for." Harper looked at the form. "And if filing it makes things worse for them?" he said. Briggs shrugged. Not without sympathy, just with the pragmatism of someone who had learned to keep those two things separate. "Not your call to make. You document what happened. The system decides what happens next." He paused at the edge of the desk. "And if this comes back wrong, if something happens down the line and there's no paperwork, it's on you." He walked away. Harper sat alone with the folder. Briggs wasn't wrong. That was the part that made it harder. The procedure existed for reasons, real ones, important ones. Documentation protected people. The chain of record-keeping was there because without it, things fell through cracks. But Melissa had followed every procedure. She had filled the forms, made the calls, waited. The system had not reached back, and now Harper was holding another form. He was still sitting with that when his computer made the quiet sound of a new notification. He looked at the screen. A message from the Administrative Review Office. Brief, professional, informational in tone. His external agency calls from the previous 2 days had been flagged during a routine audit of the department's case documentation processes. A formal review had been initiated. Not a termination, not a formal reprimand. Not yet, but real, concrete. The beginning of something with consequences he couldn't fully predict. Harper read the message twice. Then he closed it. He looked at the form, at the pen beside it. He picked up the pen, and this time, instead of filling in the standard incident report, he opened a new document and began to write something different. A full account. The park bench. Melissa's words. The confirmation number that nobody had ever followed up on. The 11 years of work. The careful forms filed and unanswered. All of it. Not to excuse what had happened on the sidewalk. To make sure that whoever read this file next would understand what had actually happened in that family, and why the standard response might not be the right one. He wrote for a long time. Then he closed the document, saved it, and went to find Okafor. Harper stopped at the door of Okafor's office. Through the small window he could see her at her desk, reading glasses on, 3 folders open in front of her, a pen moving in the margin of something. The focused stillness of someone managing more than one complicated thing at once, which, in Harper's experience, was Okafor's default state. He knocked. She looked up, took him in with a single glance, and gestured to the chair across from her desk with the pen. "Sit," she said. "Give me 1 minute." He sat. He waited. He looked at the notification still open on his phone and then put the phone face down on his knee. Okafor finished what she was writing, capped the pen, and removed her glasses. "You have the look," she said. "What look?" "The one that means you've done something off the standard path and you're trying to decide how to present it." She folded her hands on the desk. "Just tell me directly," Harper told her, "all of it. The girls on the sidewalk, the walk to the park, Melissa on the bench and what she had said. The 11 years as a nursing assistant, the arthritis, the job loss, the application that had sat in the county system for 7 months without a callback, the standard form sitting open and untouched on his desk, the administrative review notification." Okafor listened without changing expression. This was one of the things Harper had always respected about her. She received difficult information without performing a reaction to it, which meant that when she did respond, it was the actual response. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Before I say anything else, have you spoken with the girls directly?" "Briefly," Harper said. "The older one, Maggie. The younger one is 2.5. What was your read on Maggie?" Harper thought about the sidewalk, about the careful way she had positioned herself, about "I don't have time to be scared." "Composed," he said. "Protective of her sister. Old for her age in the way that comes from necessity, not from maturity." He paused. "She had something in her pocket she kept touching. I didn't ask about it at the time." Okafor nodded slowly. "Go back," she said. "Talk to her before you talk to me further. I need to know what's in that pocket before I can tell you what options exist." Harper drove back to the temporary family services room where Reyes had taken the girls while the situation was assessed. It was a small, deliberately uninstitutional space. A couch, a low table, some books and drawing supplies, a window with afternoon light coming through. Reyes had gotten Claire settled with a box of crayons and a piece of paper, and she was working on something with the complete absorption of a 2-year-old who had been given a task. Maggie was on the couch with a book open in her lap that she wasn't reading. She looked up when Harper came in. He sat down in the chair across from her. Not the desk chair, the regular one, the one that didn't come with authority attached to it. "How is she doing?" he asked, nodding toward Claire. Maggie looked at her sister. "Better. She likes to draw." "What does she draw?" "Elephants mostly. She's not very good yet, but she thinks she is." "Which is better?" Harper almost smiled. "Maggie, can I ask you something?" She looked at him. "That paper in your pocket," he said gently. "The one you've been holding on to. Can you tell me about it?" Maggie was still for a moment. Then, with the deliberateness of someone doing something they have thought about carefully, she reached into her coat pocket and took it out. It was folded into a small, firm square, the kind of fold that comes from something being opened and refolded many times. She held it for a moment before handing it across. Harper unfolded it carefully. It was a list, written in pencil, in the even, careful handwriting of a child who took the task seriously. The paper had been folded so many times the creases had softened into the fibers. Claire's breakfast, cereal with milk or toast with butter. She won't eat eggs. Claire's medicine, half a pink tablet with food, morning only. School bus, number 7, leaves at 8:10. School name, Riverside Elementary, room 14. Teacher is Ms. Odom. Emergency number, Mrs. Reyes next door. Not the other Mrs. Reyes. Harper read it slowly. Every line was a decision that an 8-year-old had made about what a stranger would need to know. Every line was a small weight that should not have been hers to carry. He turned the paper over. On the back, in slightly smaller writing, as if it had been added later, or more quietly, "Mom is sick, but she loves us. Please don't take us away." The room was very still. Claire was drawing at the low table, narrating her elephant quietly to herself. Maggie was watching Harper read, her hands folded in her lap now, the pocket empty. He folded the paper back along its worn creases and held it out to her. She took it and put it back in her pocket. "How long have you had that?" Harper asked. "Since the fall," she said. "When things started getting harder." He nodded. "Maggie," he said, "you've been taking very good care of your sister." She looked at him steadily. "Someone had to," she said, not with self-pity, not asking for acknowledgement, just simply, just truly. Harper drove back to Okafor's office with that sentence in the car with him the whole way. Harper parked outside the station and sat for a moment before going in. He was thinking about the list, about the worn creases in the paper from being folded and unfolded so many times, about the line at the bottom written in slightly smaller letters, as if it had been added carefully, as if Maggie had known it was the most important thing and had wanted to get it right. "Mom is sick, but she loves us. Please don't take us away." He thought about what it meant that an 8-year-old had written that, had thought ahead to the moment when a stranger might be reading it, and had wanted to make sure that stranger understood something before making any decisions. She had been preparing for this moment since the fall, preparing for it, managing it, carrying it, quietly, without anyone asking her to, without anyone knowing she was doing it. He went inside and walked past his desk, past the open folder, past the notification still waiting on his screen. and kept walking until he was out the back entrance and standing in the small parking area behind the building. He needed to think before he talked to Okafor, not about the procedure. He knew the procedure. He needed to think about the neighborhood, about the street, about the people who had been standing on it all afternoon and hadn't acted. He thought about the woman with the groceries, the man with the dog, the teenager who had started to dial and stopped. 3 people, all of whom had seen something that concerned them, all of whom had waited for someone else to move first. I thought someone else would handle it. He'd heard that phrase 3 times in one afternoon. He thought about what it meant, not as failure, but as pattern. A neighborhood full of people who were not indifferent, who were not cruel, who had noticed and cared and then retreated into the assumption that the machinery of someone else's response would take care of it. And then he thought about the house, about the blue mailbox, about Melissa going out to get air in the morning, and the street not registering it because the street had grown accustomed to the closed curtains and the quiet. About 7 months of gradual withdrawal that everyone around her had watched, from a careful distance, without quite finding the moment to cross. He needed to know who was on that street. He drove back. The woman with the groceries had gone inside. The teenager was gone. But the house directly to the left of Melissa's, a pale green colonial with a well-kept front garden and a wind chime on the porch, had a light on in the front room, and a figure visible through the gauze curtain. Harper knocked. The woman who opened the door was in her mid-70s, white-haired, straight-backed, reading glasses pushed up on her head, a dish towel over one shoulder in the manner of someone interrupted mid-task, who didn't mind being interrupted. She looked at Harper's uniform and then at his face and then said, "You were on the street this afternoon." "I was," Harper said. "My name is Officer Harper. Do you have a few minutes?" "Come in," she said. "I've been expecting someone to knock." Her name was Ruth Ellison. She had lived in the house for 31 years. She had known Melissa since Melissa moved in with the girls before everything changed, when there had been lights on in the evenings and the sound of children in the backyard, and a woman who sometimes came out to water the garden and stopped to talk over the fence. She sat across from Harper at her kitchen table and told him this with the careful honesty of someone giving testimony they had been composing in their head for a while. "When did you first notice things were different?" he asked. Ruth looked at the table. "Gradually, the garden went first, then the lights, then I stopped seeing her at the mailbox in the mornings." She paused. "I told myself she was tired, that she had a hard stretch, that it would pass." "Did you reach out to her?" The dish towel was still over her shoulder. She straightened it without looking at it. "I made a casserole," she said. "Chicken and rice, 3 weeks ago." She looked at Harper directly. "I walked across the yard. I stood at her door." A pause. "And then I walked back home. I put the casserole in my own refrigerator." "Why?" Harper asked. Not unkindly, genuinely. Ruth was quiet for a moment. "My husband passed 4 years ago," she said. "And in the months after, people came. They brought things, they sat with me. And some of them, they meant well, they did. But some of them made it worse without knowing. They said the wrong thing, or they needed me to be further along than I was, or they looked at me in a way that made me feel like a problem to be managed." She folded her hands on the table. "I was afraid of doing that to her, of going over there and making it about my discomfort instead of her need." Harper sat with that. It was the most honest answer he'd been given all day. Not laziness, not selfishness. Fear of causing harm to someone already fragile, from a woman who knew what fragile felt like from the inside. "Ruth," he said, "the casserole, is it still in your refrigerator?" She blinked. "Yes." "Would you be willing to try again?" he said. "Not alone this time. With me." Ruth looked at him for a long moment. The wind chime on the porch moved in a small breeze outside. "When?" she said. "Tomorrow," Harper said. "If I can get a few other things in place first." Ruth nodded once. The nod of someone who had been waiting for the right moment and had just recognized it. "I'll reheat the casserole," she said. Harper was at his desk by 7 the next morning. The office was quiet at that hour, the particular quiet of a building before it is fully woken up, when the lights are on but the noise hasn't started yet, and the day is still just potential. He liked this hour. He had always done his clearest thinking before the machinery of the day got moving. He had 3 calls to make before he could go back to Okafor. The first was to the county assistant's office. He had the general number, which was not what he needed. He worked through 2 transfers and 1 hold that lasted 11 minutes, before he reached the department that handled applications for health and housing assistance. The woman who answered introduced herself as Mrs. Ellison, a coincidence that made Harper pause for a half-second before refocusing. He gave her Melissa's full name and the confirmation number from her original application. There was a pause while the record was pulled up, then a longer pause. "I'm showing an application submitted 7 months ago," Mrs. Ellison said carefully. "It's been in review status." "For 7 months?" Harper said. "We've had significant backlog in this category," she said. "The application is complete. It's been complete since submission. It simply hasn't reached active review yet." A pause. "I'm sorry, Officer Harper. I know that's not what you were hoping to hear." Harper kept his voice level. "Is there an expedited pathway for cases with documented medical need and minor children in the household?" A short silence. "There is. It requires a formal request with supporting documentation, medical records, proof of residence, a signed statement from the applicant. If I help gather that documentation today, how quickly could it move?" Another pause, longer this time, the kind where someone is doing actual thinking rather than just preparing the next sentence. "If everything is in order," Mrs. Ellison said, "and the formal request comes through by end of business today, I can flag it for priority review. That moves it from months to days." She paused. "Potentially." "Potentially," Harper repeated. "The system is what it is," she said, not unkindly, with the tiredness of someone who had said a version of this sentence many times, and still meant it as an apology. "But, yes, if you can get me the documentation, I will personally flag it." Harper thanked her and hung up. He sat for a moment with what he had just learned. Melissa's application had been sitting in a system for 7 months. Complete. Correct. Going nowhere because the line was too long and no one had flagged it, and no one had called her back, and the weeks had kept becoming months, and she had kept trying to manage and calling and not reaching anyone, and eventually, in the way of people who have been trying for a long time and hitting walls, she had stopped calling. Not because she gave up, because she ran out of road. He wrote down everything Mrs. Ellison had told him. Then he picked up the phone again. The second call was to Father DeLuca at St. Anthony's on the east side. The church Ms. Tran had mentioned when Harper had called her the previous afternoon to ask about the school meal program for the girls. Father DeLuca was warm and slightly guilty in the way of someone who had been meaning to restart something and hadn't quite gotten there. The food assistance program had been running for years. 8 months ago it had paused when 2 key volunteers stepped back within the same month. The infrastructure was intact. The supplier relationships, the storage space, the community contacts. It just needed people. "How many volunteers to restart it?" Harper asked. 3 committed ones, Father DeLuca said. 2 weeks to get it running again. "I may know someone," Harper said, thinking of Ruth and her casserole and her 31 years on that street. The third call was to the clinic on Miller Avenue where Melissa had been seen once for her arthritis, 8 months ago, before the insurance lapsed and the follow-up appointments became unmanageable. Harper asked to speak with whoever had handled her intake. The doctor was not available, but the office manager was, and she confirmed that the records existed and that under the county's Community Health Assistance Program, which the clinic participated in, Melissa could be seen on a sliding scale basis with a referral from a social services coordinator. There was a pathway. Harper looked at his notepad. 3 calls. 3 open doors. Narrow, bureaucratic, requiring work and follow-through and documentation, and the continued willingness of people on the other end to keep them open. But they were there. The system had not failed completely. It had been slow and under-resourced and impersonal, but the doors existed. They just needed someone to walk through them. He closed his notepad and thought about what Okafor had said the night before, when he'd outlined what he was considering. This only works if she wants help, really wants it. He thought about Melissa on the bench, about the confirmation number she had written down 7 months ago and kept somewhere, about calling twice and waiting on hold and not giving up until she literally ran out of capacity to keep going. She had wanted help. She had asked for it. The system just hadn't answered in time. Harper picked up the folder from his desk. He walked to Okafor's office. This time he knocked with something in his hand other than a problem. He had the beginning of a plan. Okafor was already looking at him when he pushed the door open. Not because she had seen him coming, because she had been expecting him. He could tell by the way she was sitting. Not quite at the angle of someone working, more the angle of someone who has finished one thing and is waiting for the next. She gestured to the chair. He sat. He put the folder on the edge of her desk, not handing it over, just placing it where she could see it. And then he told her everything. The bench in the park, the list in Maggie's pocket and what was written on the back of it. The county application sitting in review for 7 months, complete and correct and going nowhere. The 3 calls he had made that morning, and the 3 open doors they had produced. He told her about Ruth Ellison next door with the casserole in her refrigerator, about Father DeLuca and the food program that needed 3 volunteers to restart, about the clinic on Miller Avenue and the sliding scale pathway that existed if a social services coordinator made the referral. He laid it out the way he had written it in his notepad, plainly in order, without editorializing. When he finished, Okafor was quiet. She reached over and picked up the folder and opened it. She looked at the standard form, still blank, the lines still empty. She looked at it for a long moment with the expression of someone reading something that isn't there, seeing the shape of what the form would produce if completed, tracing the path it would set in motion. She put it back down. "The administrative review," she said. "You saw the notification?" "Yes." "It's procedural," she said. "The external calls triggered an automatic flag. It doesn't indicate wrongdoing. It indicates deviation from standard documentation sequence." She paused. "But it is real. It's in the system. And if this case develops in a direction that draws additional scrutiny, that flag becomes part of the record." "I understand that," Harper said. "I want to make sure you do," Okafor said. "Because what you're describing, a non-standard intervention pathway, community coordination, expedited application process, all of that requires me to authorize it. And when I authorize something, I own part of whatever comes from it." Harper held her gaze. "I know that too." Okafor was quiet again. She had been with the department for 26 years. Harper had worked under her for 9 of them. He had seen her make difficult calls before, not recklessly, never recklessly, but with the particular willingness of someone who had learned, over time, that the right thing and the easy thing were not always the same, and that the difference mattered. She looked at the folder. "Tell me one more time," she said. "The girl, Maggie. What did the back of that paper say?" Harper said it from memory. "Exactly, word for word. Mom is sick, but she loves us. Please don't take us away." The office was very quiet. Outside, down the corridor, the department had woken up fully now. Phones, voices, the sounds of an ordinary working morning. Okafor picked up her pen. "I'm going to authorize the coordination pathway," she said. "It needs to be documented carefully and it needs to move quickly. The expedited application for county assistance has to go in today. The medical referral needs to be initiated through social services before end of business." She looked at him over the pen. "Are you willing to do the work this requires? Not the easy version of it, the actual version." "Yes," Harper said. "Then we do it right," she said. "Every step documented, every contact recorded, every decision justified." She paused. "And Harper, Melissa has to agree to this, clearly and voluntarily. I will not build a structure around someone who hasn't asked for it. I'll talk to her today," Harper said. Okafor nodded and began writing. Harper stood to leave. "One more thing," Okafor said without looking up. He stopped. "Ruth Ellison," she said. "The neighbor." "Yes. Ask her about the church program." Okafor kept writing. "Father DeLuca has been trying to restart it for months. He needs someone to run the volunteer coordination, someone who knows the neighborhood." She turned a page. "Someone who has been sitting with a casserole in her refrigerator long enough to understand what it means to finally deliver it." Harper stood at the door for a moment. Then he went to get his jacket. He had 4 stops to make before the end of the day. And somewhere in the middle of them, the most important conversation, the one with Melissa, the one that everything else depended on, the one where she would need to hear what was available and decide, clearly and freely, whether she wanted it. Okafor had said it simply. She has to want it, really want it. Harper drove to the pale yellow house with the blue mailbox and knocked on the door, and waited on the porch in the thin morning light. Melissa answered. She looked at him for a moment, at his face, at what was in it. "Come in," she said. "I'll put the kettle on." The kettle went on. Harper sat at the kitchen table, and Melissa sat across from him. and he told her plainly, without softening it beyond what honesty allowed, what the county application status was, what the expedited pathway required, what the clinic could offer under the community health program, and what saying yes to all of it would mean practically. He told her it would require her signature on several forms, that a social services coordinator would be involved, that there would be follow-up appointments and check-ins and a period of time when her life would feel more observed than she was used to. He told her it wasn't a perfect system, that it was slow in places and impersonal in others, that there would be frustrating days and forms that needed to be filled out twice and phone calls that went to voicemail. He told her the truth because she deserved it, and because anything less would have been an insult to a woman who had been navigating hard truths on her own for 2 years. Melissa listened with her hands around her mug. When he finished, she looked at the table for a long time. Then she said, "What happens to the girls while all of this is being set up?" "They stay with you," Harper said. "That's the point of the coordination pathway. It's built around keeping the family together while the support structure goes in." She looked at him. "You can do that?" she said. "You can actually do that?" "With Okafor's authorization, yes," Harper said. "But it requires you to be a willing participant, not just tolerating the process, actively engaged with it." Melissa looked at her hands, the swollen knuckles, the hands that had cared for others for 11 years. "I don't want charity," she said quietly. "It's not charity," Harper said. "It's a system you paid into and applied for correctly and waited on for 7 months. It's yours." Something shifted in her expression, not dramatically, just a small internal rearrangement. The particular look of someone hearing a thing framed in a way that makes it possible to accept. She nodded once. The paperwork took most of the morning. Harper made calls from the kitchen table while Melissa signed forms and answered questions from the social services coordinator who came by at noon, a woman named Ms. Rivera, brisk and organized, who had clearly done this many times and had the gift of making bureaucracy feel slightly less cold. By 2 in the afternoon, the expedited application had been submitted. The clinic referral was in. The coordination plan was documented and filed. It was a beginning, not a solution, a beginning. The distinction mattered. That evening, Harper went to Ruth Ellison's door. She answered with the dish towel still over her shoulder, which he was beginning to think might simply be a permanent feature of Ruth. He told her about Father DeLuca and the volunteer coordination role. Ruth listened. Then she said, "When does it start?" "As soon as you say yes," Harper said. She said yes. Then she took the casserole out of the refrigerator, covered it in foil, and handed it to Harper. "Take that to Melissa tonight," she said. "I'll come myself tomorrow, but she should have it tonight." Harper took the dish. Ruth looked at him from the doorway. "You know what the hardest part was?" she said. "It wasn't not knowing what to do. I knew what to do." She paused. "It was being willing to do it badly rather than not at all." Harper stood on the porch with a casserole dish in both hands and understood that Ruth Ellison had just said something that applied to considerably more than a pot of chicken and rice. Ruth came the next morning at 10. Harper wasn't there. He had a shift and 2 meetings and the continuing matter of the administrative review, which had moved from notification to a brief formal conversation with the HR coordinator that had been exactly as uncomfortable as he had expected and had resulted in a written notation in his file that was not the end of anything, but was not nothing either. He had accepted it the way you accept the cost of a decision you don't regret, steadily, without drama, filing it in the category of things that were real and couldn't be changed and weren't worth spending energy on beyond acknowledgement. Ruth went alone. She told Harper about it later on the phone in the careful way she told things, chronologically without embellishment, pausing in the places that deserved pausing. She had knocked at 9:58. Melissa had answered quickly, which Ruth took as a good sign. It meant she had been up, had been moving, had not been waiting on the other side of the door, deciding whether to answer. Ruth had come in, and then she had seen the kitchen properly for the first time. The refrigerator, when Melissa opened it to put in the dish Ruth had brought, a second casserole because Ruth had made a second one the night before without being asked, was nearly empty. Not dramatically, not completely, but in the particular way of a refrigerator that had been managed very carefully for a long time, with not quite enough to manage. A few condiments, some eggs, half a loaf of bread. On the counter, partially under a folded dish towel as if someone had placed it there without quite deciding whether to deal with it, was a utility bill. Ruth didn't read it directly. She didn't need to. The color of the envelope and the block lettering visible at the fold said enough. And then Melissa reached for a jar on the shelf above the counter, something she needed for what she was making, and Ruth watched her hands struggle with the lid, the knuckles swollen and stiff, the grip not quite finding the purchase it needed. Melissa tried once, adjusted her grip, tried again. She didn't ask for help. Ruth reached over without comment and opened the jar and set it on the counter, and moved on as if it had not happened. Because that was how you did it. You didn't make a moment of it. You just helped and kept going. They sat at the table with tea. Ruth talked about the neighborhood, the new family on the corner with the enormous friendly dog, the church program restarting on Saturday, small ordinary things that said, "This place is still here. You are still part of it." Melissa listened. And then, slowly, she began to talk back. About the girls. About Maggie's habit of organizing things. The pantry, the bookshelf, her own shoes lined up by the door. About Claire's elephants, and her absolute certainty that she was an excellent artist. Small things. The specific, irreplaceable details of a life that was still there. Still real. Still worth telling someone about. Ruth listened the way she had wanted to listen for months and hadn't let herself. After a while, Melissa looked at her hands around the mug and said, "I didn't think anyone was still paying attention." Ruth said, "We were. We just didn't know how to show up." It was not a grand statement. It was not a resolution of anything. It was just two women sitting at a kitchen table being honest with each other in the way that takes longer to arrive at than it should, and matters more than most things when it does. Ruth called Harper afterward. She told him the refrigerator, the bill, the jar. Then she said, "She's ready, Daniel, but there may be a problem with the application." Harper was already reaching for his notepad. Ms. Rivera called at 8:15 on a Wednesday morning. Harper was in his car, coffee in hand, about to pull out of his driveway. He answered on the second ring. Ms. Rivera was thorough, and she was sorry. She led with both, which told Harper that what was coming was real, and that she had been sitting with it before dialing. When she had been processing Melissa's coordination file, cross-referencing with the county assistance database the way procedure required, she had found something. Months ago, during one of the harder periods, Melissa had received a formal notice about a supplemental housing benefit, a modest program, not widely publicized, separate from the main assistance track she had applied for. The notice had come with a response form. The form had come back. One required field was blank. Not every field. One. A declaration section near the bottom that asked the applicant to confirm current household occupancy status. Formality, really. The kind of thing that seemed obvious and therefore easy to overlook when you were in pain and exhausted and trying to read official language that was not written with exhausted people in mind. In the system, an incomplete form registered the same as a refusal, and a refusal created a mandatory waiting period before reapplication. The waiting period was not yet over. Harper set his coffee down. "How long?" he said. Ms. Rivera told him. It wasn't permanent. It wasn't years. But it was long enough to create a gap, a window in which the main medical assistance could proceed, but the housing support component could not. And without the housing component, the financial stability that made everything else sustainable was compromised. The structure he had spent 3 days carefully building had a crack in the foundation. "She didn't refuse it intentionally," Harper said. "I know that," Miss Rivera said, "and I believe you. But the system doesn't have a field for unintentionally incomplete. It has complete and incomplete." A pause. "I'm not telling you this to close the door. I'm telling you because I want to find a way through it." Harper appreciated that. He said so. He called Okafor from the driveway. Okafor listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "Appeals process." Ms. Rivera mentioned it. "It requires documentation of circumstance, medical records, a written account of the situation at the time of the non-response, a supporting statement from a credentialed professional." She paused. "Get Ms. Tran. Get the clinic doctor. Get Melissa's signature on a personal statement. I'll handle the formal submission." Harper spent the next 2 days in the particular exhaustion of bureaucratic urgency. Calls and emails and documents sent and flagged for missing fields and resent. Ms. Tran wrote a supporting letter the same afternoon he called her. The clinic doctor submitted a medical summary by end of the next day. Melissa wrote her personal statement at the kitchen table with Ruth sitting beside her, and it was 3 paragraphs of plain, honest language that said more than any official form ever could. Okafor submitted everything on Thursday afternoon. Friday morning, Ms. Rivera called. Her voice was different before she said a word. "It's complicated," she said. Harper's hand tightened slightly on the phone. A pause. The exception was denied at the first level. The room Harper was standing in went very quiet. He didn't speak. Then Ms. Rivera said, "Wait." He waited. "It's been escalated to the regional coordinator." Her voice had shifted into something careful and alert. "They're reviewing it now." Harper stood completely still. The hold music on the escalation line when Ms. Rivera transferred him through was a soft instrumental version of something he almost recognized and couldn't name. He stood in the corridor outside Okafor's office and listened to it for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Then Ms. Rivera came back. "They've approved it," she said. "Compassionate exception. The waiting period is waived." Harper put his hand flat against the wall. He stood there for a moment without saying anything. Then he said, "Thank you. Thank your documentation," Ms. Rivera said. It was thorough. He went to Maggie's school that afternoon to pick up the girls. Melissa had a clinic appointment and had asked if he could. They came out in the usual wave of afternoon noise. Maggie first with her backpack and her measured walk, Claire half a step behind pulling a drawing out of her folder to show him before she'd even reached the bottom of the steps. An elephant. Immediately recognizable as an elephant, which was new. He looked at it with the seriousness it deserved. Then he looked at Maggie. She read his face the way she read everything, quickly, accurately before he said a word. "Is it okay?" she said. Harper looked at this 8-year-old who had been holding a folded piece of paper in her pocket since autumn and carrying a plan for emergencies that never should have been hers to carry. "It's going to be okay," he said. Maggie looked at him for one long moment. Then Claire took Harper's hand and pulled him toward the car because she had 3 more drawings to show him, and they weren't going to look at themselves. The days that followed moved differently, not faster. If anything, the practical work of the coordination plan moved at the steady, unhurried pace of systems, adjusting to something new, which required patience and follow-through, and the willingness to make the same call twice when the first one went to voicemail. But the quality of the movement was different. Things were going somewhere now. Each step led to a next step rather than a wall. The medical assistance application was approved within the week. Melissa's first appointment at the clinic under the community health program was on a Thursday morning. Ruth drove her, which had been Ruth's idea and which Melissa had accepted with the particular grace of someone learning slowly that accepting help and losing independence were not the same thing. The doctor was direct and thorough and treated Melissa like a person who understood her own situation, which she did. The arthritis was manageable with consistent treatment. Not curable, not simple, but manageable. A word that mattered more than it might seem to someone who had spent months believing that the distance between where she was and where she needed to be was uncrossable. Manageable meant there was a path. The church program restarted on Saturday. Ruth had found her 3 volunteers within 4 days. Francis from the Block Association, a retired teacher named Mr. Odom, who turned out to be no relation to Maggie's classroom teacher despite the name, and a younger woman named Destiny, who had grown up in the neighborhood and come back to it after college with the particular energy of someone who had been looking for a way to be useful. Father DeLuca stood at the door of the church hall on Saturday morning, looking at his restarted program, with the expression of a man who had been meaning to do something for 8 months and was only now understanding how much he had missed it. Harper stopped by briefly between shifts. He didn't stay long. He wasn't there to observe. He had just wanted to see it running. Ruth was behind the distribution table, organizing donated goods with the methodical precision of someone who had found her role and intended to perform it correctly. She saw Harper and gave him a brisk nod that contained, if you knew how to read Ruth, considerable warmth. He drove to the pale yellow house on his way back to the station. Melissa was on the porch when he pulled up. The rocking chair was occupied. She was sitting in it, both hands around a mug, the folded blanket across her knees. The afternoon light was the particular gold of early November, the kind that makes ordinary things look considered. The girls were in the yard. Claire was conducting some kind of investigation involving a stick and a patch of dirt that appeared to require full concentration. Maggie was sitting on the porch steps with a book, actually reading it this time. Her shoulders relaxed in a way that Harper had not seen in the time he had known her. Melissa saw him coming up the walk. She watched him approach with the calm attention she had, that quality of really looking, of not letting her eyes slide past things. He stopped at the porch steps. "Clinic went well?" he said. "It did," she said. "She gave me a treatment plan, an actual plan." She said it with the slight wonder of someone who had been managing without a map for so long that having one felt almost unfamiliar. Something to follow. Harper nodded. Melissa looked at him for a moment. "I didn't think anyone would fight for me," she said quietly. Harper looked at her. At this woman who had spent 11 years fighting for others, who had filled out every form correctly and waited 7 months and called twice and kept going until she literally couldn't anymore. "You fought for your girls every day," he said. "Someone had to do the same for you." Melissa looked at her mug. The gold afternoon light moved slightly as a cloud passed. Claire called out from the yard, something about what she had found in the dirt, requiring immediate adult consultation. Melissa stood up from the rocking chair and went down the steps and crouched beside her daughter in the yard and looked seriously at whatever was in the dirt and gave it the full attention it deserved. Harper watched this for a moment. Then he heard Maggie's voice from the steps beside him. "Officer Harper." He looked down. She was holding the folded paper out to him. Harper looked at the paper in Maggie's outstretched hand. The same small, firm square. The same soft creases worn into the fibers from months of folding and unfolding. The pencil lines visible through the back of it. The list, the times, the careful instructions written by a child who had needed to be ready for something no child should have to be ready for. He took it gently. Maggie looked at him. "We don't need it anymore," she said. Harper held the paper for a moment. Then he unfolded it slowly, one crease, then the next, and looked at it one last time. The breakfast instructions, the bus number, the teacher's name, the medicine schedule, and on the back in the smaller, careful handwriting that had been added quietly, as if she had known it was the most important thing. "Mom is sick, but she loves us. Please don't take us away." He folded it back along its lines. Then he held it out to Maggie. "Keep it," he said. "Not because you'll need it, but so you remember how strong you are." Maggie looked at the paper in his hand. She took it. She looked at it for a moment, differently than she had before. Not as a plan, not as a tool, as something else. Something that belonged to a chapter of her life that had been hard and was not entirely over, but was no longer the whole story. She put it in her pocket. Then she picked up her book and went back to reading. Months passed. The coordination plan did what coordination plans do when built carefully and followed through on honestly. It held. Not perfectly, not without friction. There were weeks when appointments needed rescheduling and forms that needed resubmitting, and days when Melissa's hands hurt more than usual, and the distance between where she was and where she wanted to be felt longer than it actually was. But there was a structure now, and structure, Harper had come to understand more fully than he ever had, was what made the hard days survivable instead of final. Melissa's treatment continued. The arthritis didn't disappear. It wasn't going to, but it became something she was managing rather than something managing her. She started looking at job listings in the new year. Nothing decided yet. Just looking. Just the returning possibility of a next thing. Ruth came on Tuesdays without being asked. She and Melissa had settled into the particular rhythm of neighbors who have stopped being polite strangers and started being something more durable than that. They didn't always talk about important things. Sometimes they just drank tea and commented on the weather and watched the street. That was enough. Sometimes that was everything. Maggie stopped checking the locks before bed. Not all at once. The habit faded the way habits fade when the need that created them slowly dissolves. One night she simply forgot to check. And then another night. And then it had been a week and she hadn't noticed. Claire had moved on from elephants to horses, which she drew with a confidence that bore no relationship to their accuracy, and a joy that made accuracy beside the point. On a Saturday in late November, Harper drove past St. Anthony's on his way to Ruth's block. The door of the church hall was propped open, voices and movement inside. Ruth's car in the small lot beside the building. He slowed without stopping. Then he drove onto the street. He parked and got out. The afternoon light was the same gold it had been on the day he had first turned onto this block and seen two girls standing on the sidewalk. The oak trees threw the same long shadows across the pavement. The blue mailbox was at the end of the walk, exactly where it had always been. Melissa was on the porch in the rocking chair. She raised her mug slightly when she saw him. An acknowledgement. A greeting. The shorthand of people who had been through something together and no longer needed many words. Maggie was on the steps with a book. Different book. Same posture, but the hands were loose now. Easy. No pocket being touched. Claire was in the yard. She was blowing bubbles from a plastic wand, standing in the middle of the small patch of grass, watching each one float up and catch the gold afternoon light before disappearing, completely absorbed, her whole face turned upward. Harper stood at the end of the walk and watched a bubble rise and drift and catch the light and go. He thought about a form with blank lines and a pen that hadn't moved. He thought about a woman in a red dress who had stopped once and looked back. He thought about what Melissa had said on the bench and what she had really meant and what it had taken. Not a miracle, not a single heroic act, but 5 people and a casserole and 2 days of paperwork, and one neighbor finally crossing a yard she should have crossed months earlier. He thought about Maggie's paper in her pocket. Not a plan anymore. A reminder. Claire's bubble caught the last of the afternoon light, rainbow-edged perfect briefly, and disappeared into the quiet air above the street. Harper stood on the sidewalk. The same sidewalk. Everything the same. Everything different. Fade out. The end. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And before you go, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you.